Production of the last horse soldiers was made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Southern Educational Communications Association.
Had we known what we were getting into, I know a couple of the fellows that went AWOL probably would have gone AWOL with them.
I lost anybody on that, but there wasn't a thing we could do.
One day I said to myself, Hatcher, there's a perfectly good war going on and you're not getting your piece of it.
Well, I thought we'd pulled off one big success.
You're about to hear a story of remarkable valor and physical endurance. It's also a story of pride, patriotism, and friendship. A friendship that resulted from a series of apparently insurmountable odds faced by a select group of American, Burmese, and Chinese soldiers fighting side by side on the Marco Polo Trail, just above the famed Burma Road. The Americans involved in this conflict consisted largely of the 124th Texas National Guard Horse Cavalry Regiment, organized in Houston, Texas, March 1929. A handful of these men are attending an annual reunion here at Fort Brown in Brownsville, Texas.
They were primarily organized for border security. Back at the start of World War II, nobody knew where Mexico stood, and they had a lot of ties with Germany, and the United States was fearful of an invasion from the south. And so these men were put on border patrol, and that's what they were doing. And it wasn't until later, like in, I think it's 1944, that they were actually called up for service overseas. And then in 1945 in July, the squadron was the regiment was deactivated. And it wasn't until late 1970s, early 1980s that they reactivated one squadron, and that's the squadron that I command. In fact, we brought those original colors down here for them to look at this reunion.
Lieutenant Colonel Sweeney commands today's 124th Cavalry of the Texas Army National Guard in Waco, Texas. He's doing his best to pass on the rich tradition of the 124th to his young recruits. The horses are gone, but the cavalry showmanship is still alive.
This was the last horse cav regiment in the United States Army, and now the horses that we ride weigh 52 tons and are powered by massive engines and turbines. And no, the horses were not returned. However, they're still a part of our heritage, and that's why we wear the spurs, and when we do our dining outs, we have our spurs, and we have our sabers, and we wear our Stetsons. While the rest of the division frowns at us, we strut our stuff.
In November of 1940, the 124th Horse Cavalry was inducted into federal service by President Roosevelt. By February of 1941, they were patrolling 900 miles of the Texas-Mexico border, with the majority dispatched to Fort Brown, adjacent to Brownsville in deep South Texas.
We was all recruits, and they had us all in a room, big room, orderly room, and he wanted 400 men or more that was 200 pounds or 6 foot tall. Well, we was in the 7-man pup tents up there at Fort Riley. And all the boys I was in with was 200 pounds or 6 foot. I stood on my tiptoes, held my hand up. Didn't know where we was going. He needed 400 men. We didn't know where we was going, and this is where we came to.
Saw the ad in Houston paper needed guys for 1 year service on the border, and it said heavy weapons. Well, I could see this 4- and 8-inch cannons, you know, heavy weapons. Of course, we found out later that all we had was 37 millimeter. But there was one thing about my serving in the cavalry. I never rode a horse. I was always lucked out and I was a mechanized troop. So there were a few of us that never rode horses.
Kowalczyk's opinion about horses notwithstanding, most of the men in the ranks of the 124th had joined because it offered the opportunity to ride a horse.
I like horses, and I like to ride them,
and our troop had a bunch of men that liked to play polo, and they had a kind of just a skeleton polo troop, and they'd play polo. We had a great big lot. The troop did.
Being no country boy, I wanted to ride horses. And that's the reason I joined the National Guard while I was still in high school. But naturally, when we went into service, I came on with them. I had a little time to go, which I finished on the GI qualifications. We could take tests and whatnot. But it was the horses that drew me, because that's what we had at home.
I was crazy about horses, and I used to watch his movies in San Antonio, to go to theaters every Saturday, and see the horses there, Buck Jones and Ken Maynard and all. And I wanted to ride a horse. And then in San Antonio, there was a field artillery. They come out in the parades, and I see the soldiers on top of the horses. He said, "Man, I'd love to be a soldier."
Camina, one of the youngest of the cavalrymen, wanted so much to be a horse soldier, he lied about his age to get into the 124th. Several of the soldiers stationed at Fort Brown volunteered for 1 year's service to avoid the impending draft. They were told, if you're drafted into service, you'll be committed to at least 3 years. However, if you join, you'll be required to serve only 1.
In November the 18th, you went in for supposedly a year, compulsory military training. My year would have been up December in the area of 1941. Of course, December the 7th, 1941 was Pearl Harbor. Mine and a bunch of other discharges were in regimental headquarters to be signed for discharge. And of course, after Pearl Harbor, they went into the wastebasket. And 4 years later, 1945, then we got out. So that was the year that we signed up for.
7 of my buddies and I came from Montgomery Ward store, and it was the same. A whole bunch came from Sears and everywhere else. But they said, "Come along, boys, you'll spend a year with your country, and you'll be out. The draft is coming, and those guys are going to have to spend 3 years. We'll get our jobs done. We'll be back and have our old job back." And it didn't work out that way, but it got us started.
Regardless of the circumstances surrounding their enlistment, all the members of the 124th agree that Fort Brown was not a bad detail. Of course, by the time the 124th Horse Soldiers arrived in Brownsville, Fort Brown had already accumulated close to 100 years of history. Fort Brown began as Fort Taylor, a structure of dirt parapets and gun emplacements. The year was 1845, and the Mexican-American War was nearing. Major Jacob Brown commanded the 7th Infantry Regiment at the small fort just across the Rio Grande from Matamoros, Mexico. After the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, Zachary Taylor named the tiny military outpost Fort Brown, and it became the first federal fort in the state of Texas. Soon the city of Brownsville emerged around the federal fort. Fort Brown originally consisted of 6 sets of officers' cottages, 2 soldiers' barracks, 4 storehouses, a hospital, and several workshops. It soon became the showplace of Brownsville. Many historical personages cast their shadows on the gates of Fort Brown, including Robert E. Lee, Texas Ranger Captain Rip Ford, Jefferson Davis, Ulysses S. Grant, Lew Wallace, Philip H. Sheridan, and for a brief period of 2 months, even the Mexican flag flew over Fort Brown after the Red Robber of the Rio Grande, the red-headed Juan Nepomuceno Cortina, raided and took control of Brownsville and Fort Brown in September of 1859. After 1877, the newly constructed Fort Brown gradually faded from the public eye, and the government continually threatened to abandon it. Then, in 1882, Fort Brown again became part of the historical record when a first lieutenant assistant surgeon by the name of William C. Gorgas began important work that led to the conquering of yellow fever. In 1916, the Pancho Villa raids from Mexico garnered publicity for the Brownsville area. During the 1920s Prohibition era, Soldiers at Fort Brown guarded against bootleggers from across the Rio Grande. And during World War I, several military cavalry units trained at Fort Brown. Today, the old Fort Brown property serves as the campus of Texas Southmost College. When the 124th arrived in February of 1941, Fort Brown was considered country club duty.
Fort Brown was the most beautiful post in all South Texas. I don't think there's another post here in all Texas as beautiful as this place is. It was just outstanding. Everything was painted white, and everything was green and cleaned up real nice.
And I just love to get up in the mornings, make reveille, go for the morning hike or march, whatever you want to call it, and could march to a band. It just made it so much easier. And that was every morning.
It was pleasant duty. In fact, it was like a country club. And those of us who were single, and most of them were, immediately went out and found us a girlfriend.
I saw all these guys from Houston, and I thought, what are they having down here, a convention or something? We weren't even aware, really, of the National Guard or whoever else was out post. So we had, you know, lots of opportunities for fun. They were eager for friendship, and as I said, we were one of the few bachelor girls in that early days, because most school teachers, and they were away from home, lived in a boarding house or lived with someone. And we cooked lots of hamburgers and entertained a lot of hungry boys.
Our first formal date was the night before Pearl Harbor. And that was the last time she saw me in civilian clothes. From then on, I was in uniform.
Then we married in the little chapel on post. And as he said, it was July the 4th, and it was a hot Saturday afternoon. And the soldiers were, the guardsmen were out with their shotguns, and the prisoners were cutting the grass, and so we kind of had a shotgun wedding, but after 53 years, it's turned out pretty good.
After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, life at Fort Brown became a little more serious. Mexico was uncommitted to either side, and tensions grew as the war progressed.
And they put me on guard duty around the guardhouse. And of course, I was having fun, cutting up, and I told them I was aiming to shoot the first one that moved. Well, when we come in to relieve, well, you had a loaded gun. Well, he was unloading it, and it accidentally went off. And they all said, Gandy done shot him a man.
We set up machine guns on both sides, our side of the bridge. And I had a platoon of machine gunners. I was night sergeant on a Saturday night, and I decided I better check on my people about midnight. As I was sneaking up on them, I found they were asleep. And the minute I yelled, they pulled the boat back, started firing across the river. I turned the flashlight on myself. I was waving in Spanish and English, you know, mistake, mistake, it's accident, you know, because these were young kids. They shocked when I said something, and they fired across there. Well, we had a tour of officers going across that bridge for the next 6 hours trying to apologize to the Mexican government. And we kind of resolved it.
Meanwhile, World War II raged in Europe. It was becoming clear that the U.S. government, that the Japanese imperial forces had their sights on neighboring China. Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist army were in a war to save China, and the Japanese were beginning to sever Chinese supply lines. The sea was virtually cut off, and air transport was becoming increasingly difficult. The Burma Road from India provided the only line of transport. This route was slow, and the Japanese were beginning to close in on this final lifeline. China needed help quickly, and the United States was eager to provide it. Toward the end of April 1944, the 124th was alerted for a permanent change of station from the Texas border to Fort Riley, Kansas. Mail began to be censored, and the troopers received APO 5680 in care of Postmaster, New York, New York. To many, this meant assignment in Europe, or so they thought. Their horses were transferred to the post quartermaster and turned out to pasture, later to be sold at auction. They did not know it then, but this marked the official end of the 124th Horse Cavalry Regiment. The war for them had just begun. 3 months after leaving the easy life of Fort Brown, the soldiers of the 124th boarded the USS General H.W. Butner, bound for Bombay, India.
On that ship, we went through several seasons there. We crossed the international date line. We left in the summer here. We got in southern Australia. We had winter time. We crossed the equator again into Bombay. We run another summertime. So we had different seasons there all in 1 year.
There was no air conditioning at all. And time you stack them in there as close together as you can. You cut 4 or 5 high. It got hot in there. As bad as I hate to say it, but it's truth. When that sweat falls from the guy over you and drips down on you, it's just not a very good feeling.
Lord, that was a trip. That really was. We were down 6 floors below, you know. And during the night, the toilet stopped up. The water just, it was terrible. And many nights, we didn't know it at the time. We thought that they had these big guns on there. See, they'd go up, I mean, they were practicing, but they weren't telling us anyway, and we thought they was really fighting somebody. See? And there we were down in the hole just, well, we knew we were going to get hit, but we didn't.
After a month at sea, the last horse soldiers of the 124th were assigned to Camp Ramgarh, India, where they were organized into a long-range penetration unit, codenamed the Mars Task Force. At Ramgarh and later at Camp Landis, they began a vigorous training schedule designed to prepare them for the long march to battle the Japanese at Burma Road.
Our training mostly consisted of walk, full pack with a rifle. Oh yeah, and those salt pills. We had to eat lots of salt pills.
The first sergeant grabbed me one day and said, I want you to go over here and 2 more guys. So I said, gee, what kind of rotten detail I'm on now to go into the Ramgarh Training Center, where there was enlisted men and officers that trained the Chinese Army. And ended up, mainly the 2 guys, we were on the rifle team. We shot our guns on weekends at the meet against the British. So it was quite an experience, and also they asked us to come over and have breakfast for them. But there it was. They had plates, silverware, eggs. He says, how do you want them? You know, sunny side up, scrambled, or over easy, which was quite a change from the mess hall that we, food that we had at the troop area.
They would kill a beef, a cow. They would bring it, they'd kill it in the morning. They would bring it to us by 10 or 11 o'clock. It was still warm. And we would try to serve it for supper. And it was still wiggling nearly. And we've had birds, these vulture-type birds, swoop down and take food off of the plates and off of the kitchen area during that particular time. So I don't know whether they could eat it or not. Half the time we couldn't. It was so tough. You know, you've got to cure meat before you can serve it, really.
After 3 months of intensive and painful training and fighting the birds for food, the men of the Mars Task Force became restless and anxious to join the fight for the Burma Road. Rumors and stories circulated among the men about the fine mounts the government was going to send. They did get new mounts, but they were not horses.
We could look across the Irrawaddy River over there where the Chinese were camped, and we could see a bunch of mules. And it kind of tickled us. The Chinese going to get some mules. But one day they came in and loaded those Chinese up in trucks and took them to Bamo, and we got the mules. We were completely filled with apprehension and anxiety because this was all new to us. And we knew at the other end of the trail down there that we were supposed to meet the Japanese. And naturally, we wondered if we would be man enough to qualify as a combat soldier. We found out that we could, and we did.
We had no idea what was happening because we didn't have advance notice of where we were going or nothing. All we knew we were going. And so everybody took what they had in their pack, but I think every night something else got dropped. Time we got way down to Mongwe or somewhere, those packs were pretty well lightened up from the first day.
It felt like, my God, are we gonna climb that thing? And sure enough, yeah, we were. And on climbing those mountains, you'd come to another mountain where you had a ravine or a canyon that I don't know, the Chinese or the Burmese had built that drop a big tree across there, and you had to go across on that tree. And we had war dogs that from some other outfit, and those war dogs were so scared that they'd get on and crawl just like this on that log.
The night before we started out, we were called. The officers called us together, and our company commander told us, we are going to be fighting the Japanese back. We're not going down to hit the Burma Road. We're going to go around, say. And if you get wounded, we can't do anything for you other than to try to make you comfortable and leave you by the side of the road.
Over a period of 31 days, the soldiers of the 124th and the others who made up the Mars Task Force marched 300 miles over mountains in excess of 7,800 feet high. Understand, these were men from the flatlands of Texas. Many of them had never even seen a mountain in their whole life, much less marched over one with full military pack. There were two lifesavers along the trail. The first was a Kachin Ranger.
They were a group of native Burmese coming out of the mountainous area there. They were tough little people. They carried knives and very wiry looking little people. They were our scouts, and they led us through the mountainous area, which we went through. We went through an area that it was mountainous enough that we would walk 5 and rest 10, leading mules. And the Kachins took us through areas that, from my understanding of it, no white people had ever been through before.
If it hadn't been for those little brown men, I don't believe we could have made it, because RMF didn't do us any good because we weren't going by the road. We were going back trails, see? And they knew those back trails. They hated the Japanese with a passion. I remember that I had one in our platoon, and he had a bunch of, it looked like dried figs on his belt. So the interpreter told me those are Japanese ears. He had killed so many Japanese because they had killed his families here. And they loved our guns. Oh, they really loved them because they had to fight with these knives. So all I can say about the Kachins is that they were, without them, I don't think we would have made it.
The second lifesaver, and perhaps the most valuable, was one of God's creatures of burden, the mule.
Back on the farm, we didn't have mules. We had horses. And my uncles at that time, they wouldn't have a mule on the place. But after we got into Burma and got those mules, we fell in love with those rascals.
At first, we hated them. Oh, we hated those damn mules. But they were lifesavers. There's been a many a boy that is alive today because a mule took his bullet. With these heavy equipment that they had, you know, going up these mountains, it was pitiful. And then you got a 70-pound bag on your head, see. Many times you see 2 or 3 boys hanging onto the tail of a mule.
I remember we just had bivouacked, and we were in the vicinity of Bomo. And at that time, I thought we had that we were going to hit the Japs at Bomo. So to me, of course, I missed home, and I missed the Christmas tradition. But and it was, I mean, I thought we was going into combat the next day or two at that time. So, of course, I would have liked to have been home.
I carried a prayer book, and one of many, I'm sure. With our little squad there that night, I read in a prayer book to myself. Then I asked the other ones whether they cared to see the book. And best I can remember, every one of them read in that prayer book. And during this time, there wasn't no more kindling or firewood thrown on the fire. And as we was reading, and I suppose everybody thinking about their loved ones back home, the fire just went out. And that's how I spent Christmas Eve.
That was awful tough, and it. I'm afraid that I wasn't too brave that night. I just was awfully quiet, and then finally I just had to leave my family and just go and have a good cry.
It was pretty quiet. We didn't, there wasn't anything that we could celebrate. All we could do was just stand there and hope for the best, to survive another day. And Christmas was no different to us at that time than just any day.
The first Christmas came just 9 days out of Camp Landis. The men of the old 124th and the Mars Task Force did not know what lay in store for them on the trail. Morale was beginning to sag, and the few lighter moments they experienced seemed to keep them going.
The native had a chicken, happened to be a rooster. And knowing that our groceries was very limited to different stuff we had to eat, He tried to tell the soldier that he was trying to trade with that that rooster laid eggs. In other words, he could have egg for breakfast. I didn't trust them fellows after that. I never tried to trade with them.
They would give you anything for salt. And sugar, they'd never heard of sugar. In fact, they called it sweet salt, see? And they did things for us, oh, they were just wonderful, see? And we couldn't do enough for them, because, and they would give us eggs or chicken, see? And of course to us, that was something great, after eating that sea ration that we was getting.
The mother dog of the little dog had charged one of our boys, and he killed it. He killed the mother, and it had 5 little puppies. And I picked one out. Now this happened at Michino, and I picked one of them, and I carried it all the way. But it was the cutest thing. And the correspondent we had there, they call it the Stars and Stripes, he's the one that took those pictures.
At times we would trade with natives. One time we got a dozen eggs, fresh eggs, which was real good. And another time we tried to trade a manna. I don't know, they had extra mannas they had dropped to us, which is a 6-foot 6-inch square piece of heavy canvas that we wrapped our supplies in for our mule pack deal. And a white one, like a neon light out there. Well, gee, we don't want that. So natives came by and they carrying some chickens and roosters. So we conned one of the natives into taking that manna and giving us that rooster he had in that cage. Well, we killed that rooster the next morning, and we cooked that booger in that helmet all day, and that evening he was still rough, but we did have some rice. We threw some rice in there. We had some good rice soup and tough chicken to eat.
We pulled jokes on these guys, and in other words, we'd put a rope under a blanket, and when the man laid down, we'd pull the rope and holler snake, and the man, he'd climb a tree before you knew what he was doing. But it's just a bunch of kid stuff to relax.
What we call a swaley slide when we were in the mountains. The big heavy rains came and thunderstorms, and we had to put our ponchos on. And the mules had never seen us with ponchos, so they was kind of shy and rickety and jumping around, but they calmed down after a little bit. But that afternoon, we came off the hills and coming down the Swaley River. That's what we call a Swaley slide. We slid half of that thing down. We didn't walk, we slid. Mud and everything, and one of the guys, he had his mule with him, and they was both going down the trail. But he went around that tree that way, and the mule went that way, and they met together and bang. The mule won.
As the men of the Mars Task Force drew closer to the Burma Road, the jungle became thicker and more difficult to traverse. Their supplies were airdropped along the trail, and these included grain for the mules, medical supplies and ammunition, and of course, the men's food rations.
They were comical to one point and disastrous to another point. Of course, all of our food, ammunition that we might need was on parachutes. All the feed for the mule was free dropped. And those natives, they would look up in the sky and watch that feed drop, and they had a number of casualties that got hit by a whole big sack of feed. They were amazed. They didn't know what was coming. But I'm amazed that the airline, the people that was running the planes that knew where we were even. And again, the people that was standing in the door of those C-46s kicking that food out in the parachutes, you got to commend them too, because they're looking down 1,000 or so foot and watching that stuff drop. You know, that's got to be a pretty good experience.
Well, there was quite a transition, even on the Burma Road there. We were walking, and there'd be trucks, convoy trucks passing up, and dust would roll in our faces, and there'd be a whole bunch of Chinese in the back riding, and we're walking. So we kind of got, but nothing we could do about it, had to accept it. but when we first run the first mountain hill, climbing past Bombo, we were always used to walking 45 minutes, resting 15. That's all we've ever done. But that first hill got us that first day. The artillery officers, of course, they were from, they had training in Colorado, and they knew how to do the mountain deal, 10 and 5 or something like that. And before the day was over, that's what we were doing. That 45 and 15 was cut out, because there's no way you can march 45 minutes up a hill and rest 15. You had to almost reverse that.
They gave us a book identifying things that you could eat out of the jungle. But a lot of guys thought, hell, that's poison. You ain't going to eat that. They had a fern that grew about this big, and you dig down in it and had a potato on it about this long and about so long, and you could eat it just like you do potato. And it was pretty good, but a lot of guys wouldn't eat it. They'd starve before they'd eat it. Boy, I ate it. Glad to get it.
After 31 consecutive days on the march, the Mars Task Force reached Mongwe, just above the Burma Road. They were tired, sore, and wondering when it was all going to end. Little did they know that for the next 21 days, they would be engaged in a battle for their lives against a more than formidable opponent. They had one simple order from headquarters.
Kill Japanese. And we had been trained for that. The funny part of it, I as an individual, I was scared, of course, but we all went. And I remember these Banzer attacks that I know whether I killed one or whether I killed two, I don't know, but I do know I got one. I put one completely out of a, and I had a hand grenade, and I threw it at him, and otherwise he might have got me. The idea is, don't hesitate. Get him before he gets you, and that's the way we work.
And our orders were to take that hill, to attack and take the hill. We attacked, but we didn't take the hill. We got run off the hill. That's when I told her I was the first one that fired from our outfit. When we were attacking, I looked to my left, and I saw a Jap laying there, so I opened fire on him. And everybody wanted to know what I was firing at, and I told them a Jap. And they asked me if I hit him. And I told them, I'm surprised he asked me that. You know damn well that I'm a pretty good shot, and I had hit him. But we lobbed a hand grenade at him. Then we went to look at him, and the guy had been dead probably a week.
I was in A Troop, and we had one hill that we were to take. And of course, that was an early morning start on it. And of course, me being a buck private, I didn't know much about the missions or what all they had in mind. But we did make our move on that. After some air support, we had, I believe, 4 fighter planes that come in and softened them up a little bit. And the artillery had softened them up a little bit. So A Troop didn't have too much trouble, even though there was a few deaths and a lot of Japanese. It didn't take long to secure the hill, like less than an hour probably.
A Troop was assigned to attack this particular hill, and they brought my group in from outpost, and a platoon from C Troop relieved us. And Captain Locke, our troop commander, said, give your boys a good night's sleep, because A Troop's going to attack the hill in the morning, and the 1st platoon is going to be leading the attack, and your squad will be up front. He said, give them a good night's sleep. I said, okay, have if we can sleep. But anyway, we made the attack the next morning, and there was supposed to be, they told me there was 20 men on the hill, 25 at the most.
Enemy?
And we took the hill in an hour and 55 minutes, and there was 34 bodies up there when we got through. But there were 2 men killed and 7 wounded, and I was one of the wounded when the thing was over.
Japs was coming so fast, we just couldn't fight them off. And of course, I wasn't at the phone, but I was told later that the guy called artillery, and he said, and told them to start dropping them shells, and right now, and he told them where to drop it. Of course, you know, they have all that stuff, how far you are away and all that. And they said, well, if we drop the shells where you're telling us to, we'll be dropping them right on top of you. He said, that's where the Jap are, is drop them. And brother, that really saved us that night, the artillery.
The Japanese soldier proved to be a formidable opponent. The enemy forces had established themselves so well that the soldiers of the Mars Task Force were forced to engage in hand-to-hand combat as they advanced. The mortality rate for American servicemen was especially high. During any precious respite from the continuous mountain warfare, the men turned to the only relief they had, their religious faith.
When we were here at Fort Brown, I used to go to, I'm Catholic, I used to go to the Mass every Sunday. And hardly any soldiers went. When we got on the ship, there were a few more turned up that, geez, these guys, I didn't know this guy was Catholic, a bunch of them. Then when we got over there and ready to go to combat, the whole damn troop was all Catholics. They all thought of church then.
I'm a Christian, and I believe in God Almighty. I'll never forget. I prayed to the good Lord for bringing me safe into that God-forsaken country. I'll never forget that. I know that the good Lord had a lot to do with me coming through. When you see your own buddy getting killed right by you and nothing happens to you,
prayer, I think, sustained us both. You know, that was, I really never did feel like that he wasn't going to come back. I had enough faith, and I just felt like he was going to come back, you know. But I could have been wrong, and for the fact that he did come back safe and sound, I thank God every day.
For 21 consecutive days, the men of the Mars Task Force battled the Japanese for control of the Burma Road. Their ace in the hole, so to speak, was the classic military tactic: surprise. The Japanese forces had no idea they were coming.
They wondered how we got in it. They said they didn't come in by air. They didn't come up the Burma Road. There's no way that anybody can come over all those mountains on foot. And this is what the Japanese said. They must be men from Mars. Thus our name, the Mars Task Force.
Jack Knight was an outstanding officer. To me, he's the only man. He was a sergeant in F Troop, went to OCS and received his commission, and he was requested to come back to the same regiment. And you're not supposed to come back to the regiment, you're supposed to go a different outfit. But he came back because he was well-liked, And during the overseas, he took over his old F Troop, his old alma mater, and they led it as a troop commander, and his brother was the first sergeant. And that's unique, you know. And I never seen that done before. And everybody liked him so much, we call him Jack. He had 10 boys, Hispanic boys in the outfit, and different troops, different platoons, and he got them all in the company to lead his troop in at the front. And they did a good job, and he kept on going with them, and they wiped out about 5 or 6 machine gun nests and pillboxes and hand-to-hand fighting. And he was wounded twice, but then he got blind, and he just couldn't go anymore, and he finally got shot. His brother was pretty close to him, and he was taking care of his brother, and he died there. They awarded the Medal of Honor, the only one awarded in the CBI.
Well, I heard this morning, you know, we have the reunion, and they have their meeting, and we give these people, these old veterans, their chance to say something. And one of them talked about Jack Knight, and he won the Medal of Honor, and he was the only one in that theater, especially in the ground forces, that won the Medal of Honor, doing a significant accomplishment. And this guy said, he's our only hero. And I had to take exception with that. He is not the only hero. These guys are the heroes. You know, we all talk about we have no heroes to look up to. We don't have any hero images anymore. I don't know how all the younger people feel, but these are the kind of men that are my heroes. They laid their lives on the line for what they believed in. They answered their call to duty. They went where they were sent, and they had to realize what was going on. But these guys didn't argue about that. They knew they had a duty. They were totally dedicated to their country, and they still are. These are the kind of men that snap to attention as quick as they can get there when they see those colors come in. In my color guard, and they're always up there with the new troopers and talking to them about the colors. These men are patriots, and they're my heroes, and they need to be recognized as such. They are the heroes of this country.
In those 21 days of battle, the Mars Task Force fired more than 3,800,000 rounds of ammunition. When the smoke finally cleared, those who could manage it made their way down to the Burma Road. At this point, the men of the 124th began to realize the full extent of their mission.
Well, when we was on the Burma Road, believe it or not, that's when word came that the war had ended. Not our battle, the war. Well, there's not a whole lot of ways you can celebrate in the jungle. So, I unloaded my rifle. What a day. That's what I done when we stepped on the Burma Road.
I think I just looked and thought, this is what we came for. But I had, when I was younger, I had, through newsreels and all, had watched the building of the Burma Road, and I mean, it amazed me as a teenager what all the Chinese were doing over there. So I just wondered what it'd be like, and sure enough, when I was 18, I was out on the Burma Road.
Ooh, I guess mission accomplished. You know, to be honest, I don't know that a lot of our people really knew what we were supposed to be doing. We were a long-range penetration. We were hundreds of miles behind the enemy lines, and our objective, of course, was the Burma Road. And I know we cut the Burma Road. The Chinese army was coming down the Burma Road. We cut the Burma Road, forcing the Japanese to go on and back, retreat. I guess it was an exhilarating, you know, moment in your life that here, I'm on the Burma Road and we've opened it up. I guess that's your feeling that you'd get. But as I say, trying to remember your feelings 50 years ago or more, it's kind of difficult. Very difficult.
Nowadays, the public would be, there'd be massive outcries if we did this to an Army unit. Put it behind enemy lines, not feed it for maybe 4 days at a time. These men went without rations for several days often. They ended up having to eat the animals they took with them. The type of action they had to do, we have special forces that do that. We wouldn't think about using a full-size battalion force nowadays without a lot more thought than went in this. And I'm not arguing about the tactics or anything else, but this was a massive accomplishment. We don't even, most of the time, this isn't even part of our battle plan anymore to do something like this.
Just proud of it, that's all. I'm proud I was part of it.
It's an organization that I love. All these boys are like brothers to me. See? There's not a thing that we wouldn't have done for each other. And I guess it's still the same way.
I'm sure there were things I'd rather have done, but I'm not sorry that I went through the experience that I did. I think any time a person goes through, I guess you'd say a war, or any sort of an action such as this, it's got to be a remembrance that's impressed you all your life, and anyone that walks away from something like that has got to be exceptionally lucky, because you can think back the number of people that did not come back from the action in Europe or Burma or wherever. It's got to be, you've got to say, boy, was I lucky, because there could have been a bullet out there with your name on it, and it didn't get you, and you come home, and so many of them didn't. So, yeah, I'd say the 5 years were well worth everything that we put into it, and I say, it was an experience that you'll never forget. You hope you never have to do it again, but one that we still talk about it today at this reunion that we're now attending. We've got a lot of young people here with this 124th Cavalry mechanized, that they are very eager to talk to us and to learn our thoughts for their remembrance, for them to remember what they're doing. In fact, I asked them, what are y'all going to do when we all die? Are y'all going to continue this organization? They said, yes, we are going to continue. Y'all have made history. We would like to continue the organization, the 124th Cavalry. We'd like to move on and make our own history, maybe later on in years, but continue your history as well. You made your memories, we'll make ours.
I would say that they are really on the right track as far as I'm concerned about trying to maintain. And of course, I'm probably the youngest person here. I'm 69 years old. And I've often wondered, I mean, most of the guys are 6 or 8 years older than I am, some of them 10. And I wondered about the end. But now we can see it opening up to be maintained.
A videotape copy of The Last Horse Soldiers can be obtained by calling 1-800-433-2522 or write to Video Services, KMBH TV, P.O. Box 2147, Harlingen, Texas, 78551. The cost is $21.95 and includes shipping and handling. Texas residents, please add sales tax. Production of The Last Horse Soldiers was made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Southern Educational Communications Association.